Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillah. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. Welcome back, everyone, to lecture 11. We are now sort of into the Battle of the Ditch, the Al-Khandaq, or known as Al-Ahzab, the Battle of the Ahzab. Where we left off in the last lecture was the Prophet ﷺ building the ditch with the companions. So we're going to pick up right where we left off, and we're going to look at the initial reaction of the Quraysh. Obviously, they were thrown off because they've never seen anything like that, and talk a little bit about how, alhamdulillah, that was, a very minor, from a body count point of view, a very minor battle, but it was consequential because the Prophet ﷺ was able to successfully repel the attack of the Quraysh. So now Medina is completely, fortified, alhamdulillah. This leads into the treason of Bani Qurayda, because it was Bani Qurayda and some of the people of Bani, obviously not all of them, but some of them that colluded with the Quraysh and the other Ahzab, the other tribes that led to the siege of Medina. So this is a very important part of the Sira because it's oftentimes used by detractors of Islam and misunderstood for what it is. But the reason I've been using certain words about Constitution of Medina as citizens' rights, homelands, collusion, treason, etc., to make us understand what it is we're talking about. So we're going to talk about the siege of Bani Qurayda and then the subsequent expulsion of Bani Qurayda. There were many that were executed from Bani Qurayda for their treason, but not all of them. So we're going to talk about that. We'll also mention a couple of marriages of the Prophet ﷺ that took place during and right after Bani Qurayda. Then we're going to look at, let's see, then there are some, this is in the year of 5, then we get into the year 6 of the Hijrah, and then we're going to look at some of the minor battles that took place, Muhammad ibn Salama and Banu Layhan. And I'll give you a total count at the end of that because it's just in my notes at this time of all of the battles that the Prophet ﷺ fought and the body count of the Muslims. Then that will take us into sort of the beginning end of year 5, the beginning of year 6, which will be taken up by the issue of the hypocrites. And if we have time, we'll get into that. If not, we'll do that in the next lecture. Those are the main topics for today, so we'll begin this discussion, inshallah, in the next clip. All right, so in the Battle of the Ditch, the Prophet ﷺ is building the ditch. Remember, we ended by him striking that big stone and saying, Allahu Akbar, I've been given the keys of the Levant, the keys of Persia, and the keys of Yemen. It was at this time that the Prophet ﷺ, he told the Sahaba, and this is a Sahih Hadith, say Hamim la yansurun. Hamim is sort of like a battle cry, and this is, obviously from the Quran itself. Many of the surahs begin with the letters Hamim, and this is sort of a battle cry that he gave them at this time, and it became a sunnah for all of us. The Prophet ﷺ stood in the ditch, or not in the ditch, on the other side of the ditch, with 3,000 of the companions. So this is pretty all in. Everybody that was able to was fighting. Now the Quraysh, when they came and they saw this, as I said in my introductory clip, they were thrown off because they had never seen anything like this before. Some of the Quraysh, sort of the more kind of brave of them that were on horseback, they said, well, let's find, it's man-made, so obviously it's not machine-made, obviously there's going to be shallow areas. Let's find the shallowest area and kind of cross over and breach the ditch, which they tried to, but Imam Ali alayhi salam was able to find them and he killed them. And they tried to do this for days, but the Madanese, alhamdulillah, repelled them. Of all the casualties, there were 6 Muslims and 10 from Quraysh. So a low body count. From the statistic point of view, this is a victory, as we said, the way we kind of established the victory. But it was a major event, major military event, because the Madanese were able to successfully repel the Quraysh. And so that's kind of like the key that we need to keep in mind. After the Meccans leave, this brings up now, or segues into the issue of Banu Qurayda, because they were supposed to join the fight. Because this is an attack not on Islam, well, it's an attack on Islam, but it's an attack also on the homeland, this new political body politic called the State of Medina. But not only did the Bani Qurayza not help out, they were colluding with the enemy. So imagine if you're a modern nation and there's a whole subset of people that are colluding with the enemy, and giving them secrets where the defense lines are, where the munitions are, supply line, just selling out secrets. I mean, this is treason. This is the highest form of treason that's known. So everything that we're about to read, you need to understand that that's the background, not some kind of Muslim Jewish thing. It has nothing to do with that, because the Bani Qurayza could have easily been a polytheistic tribe or a Christian tribe, or a Muslim tribe for that matter, that reneged on their covenant. During the time of, I'm gonna skip. I have to skip some small story. I was about to say a small story. I'm gonna unfortunately have to skip some of the stories. But to highlight the kind of collusion that Bani Qurayza had during the Battle of the Ditch, there was a kind of a home or a place where the women and the children were hiding, and in that place were also munitions and weapons and foods. Hiding with them was Hassan ibn Thabit. Hassan ibn Thabit, radiallahu anhu, he was not a fighter. He was what we would probably call today like an artist, a poet. Not that poets and artists can't be fighter, but I mean that was his dominant thing. He was not a fighter. So he was hiding with them. And with them was Safiya bint Abdul Muttalib, radiallahu anhu, who was the Prophet's aunt, alayhi salatu wasalam. She noticed that some of the people of Bani Qurayza were actually kind of trying to attack this fortified area, and because they were colluding with the enemy. Safiya told Hassan, "Go down and kill this man before we are found out." He says, I'm not a fighter. So she actually goes down and she kills the enemy. And the Prophet ﷺ received news about this, so he sent some of his companions to Bani Qurayza to confirm, that this happened. And the messenger that went found that they were cursing the Prophet ﷺ and had openly reneged on their treaty. So now the Prophet ﷺ has to deal with this, because this is completely unacceptable. This is like the enemy within now. So we were able to withhold the attack from the enemy without, but now we have the enemy within. So the Prophet ﷺ, he consults with the companions, and they agree that they will give that they would give Ghatafan a third of a certain area of fruit to leave. The companions asked if there was any revelation about this or not, and he said no, so they advised against it. A man from Ghatafan named Nu'aym ibn Mas'ud ibn Amir al-Ashja'i, he came to tell the Prophet ﷺ of his Islam. The Prophet ﷺ asked him to work inside the Ghatafan on behalf of the state of Medina. So he told his people when he went back, the Prophet ﷺ is trying to break the alliance between Qurayza and Ghatafan. This is what's going to lead to the issue of Qurayza. He went back and he told his people, look, we have no guarantee from Quraysh. We're kind of all alone now that they left. So there's a negotiation that takes place between Ghatafan and Bani Qurayza. This happens in the beginning of Shawwal of the 5th year of the Hijrah. And the Prophet ﷺ said Hudhayfa al-Yamani inside enemy lines to gather information. This kind of thing took about a month, the month of Shawwal. After the ditch episode ends and there's still this lingering issue of Bani Qurayza, which we'll talk about, the Prophet ﷺ said his famous statement, now we will fight them, they will not fight us, we will go to them. So now he decided that they're going to take the military action on the offensive, beginning with Bani Qurayza. He's no longer going to just sit there and receive all these blows. Right after the negotiations with Ghatafan, because the Ghatafan had colluded against Medina, the Prophet ﷺ, he said his famous statement, do not pray Asr, لا تصلين العصر إلا عند بني قريظة, do not pray Asr prayer until you get to Bani Qurayza. So the 3,000 Muslims that were there at the ditch, they had 30 horses, they went to Qurayda and they surrounded the city. Abu Lubaba had dealings with them, and he had entered the city and saw, kind of saw the fear that they were in, and he softened towards them. And the leader of Bani Qurayda, Ka'b ibn Asad, asked if they should follow the rulings of the Prophet ﷺ, and Abu should we listen to him. And Abu Lubaba, he kind of went like that, like they're going to kill you if you do that. So there's a little bit of a, kind of I'll call it like a stutter step. He softened when he saw that because he'd been going to them frequently. Abu Lubaba realized that he had made a mistake, so he goes back to Medina and he ties his pillar. He ties himself to a pillar in the mosque, and this lasts for 6 days until revelation comes to give him tawbah. So this was, I don't want to say like a act of treason. He didn't do it for a treasonous reason. He did it because these are like people that he's been dealing with for years, and he's like, no, if you do that, they're going to kill you. And he kind of realized, okay, well, this is a state of war now. I shouldn't have done that. The Prophet ﷺ said about this before he tied himself up, if he had come to me, I would have forgiven him, but now he did what he did, so he will have to wait for Allah Ta'ala to forgive him. Bani Qurayda could have outlasted the Muslim siege. They had ample supplies and ample weapons, and the Muslims had limited resources because they only carried what they could carry from Medina to Bani Qurayda. So this was a situation of nerves, not of resources and odds. وَتَحْسَبُوهُمْ جَمِيعًا وَقُلُوبُهُمْ شَتَّى. Allah says about the enemy, you think that they are united, but they are not. So quickly, Bani Qurayda capitulated. They got scared, even though from a numeric point of view, they had greater strength and the odds would have been with them because they're in a fortified location and whatnot. So who comes in to kind of settle this dispute? Sa'd ibn Mu'adh. He was from the Aus, and the Aus was allies with Bani Qurayda, so the Prophet ﷺ allowed him to handle this case. So Sa'd was still in Medina, injured from the Battle of the Ditch. That was one of the details I didn't cover. And then he came and he said the men should be killed, the women spared and they're expelled. And the Prophet ﷺ, this is indeed what Allah Ta'ala had decreed. So it turns out that they had 1,500 swords, 200 spears, and 300 shields. So, for the statistics we're talking about, that's a lot of weapons. The men were killed between 600 and 700. This is the point that a lot of people get flustered about. How could this happen, and how could this be compatible with Islam and the mercy of the Prophet ﷺ? We'll pick up answer that question inshallah in the next clip. So the issue of Banu Qurayza that I want you to understand is not an issue of religion, it's not an issue of creed, it's not some kind of eternal conflict between Muslims and Jews or something like that, but rather that these were armed people that had created a kind of a militia inside the state of Medina, openly, from their own account, openly colluding with Quraysh and the Ahzab against the state of Medina. So, and because Banu Qurayza was the distance of travel, so if the distance of travel is like 51 miles, it's farther away, but it's still part of the state of Medina. That's why, just to go back to what I said earlier, when we talk about the state of Medina, that's the correct term. It's not the city of Medina, it's a state, because there are all of these Qurayda, Fadak, Qaynuqa. They're not all in what we call today Medina, but they're all like outlying cities. All of that together with their borders is now a nation, constituted under the Wathiqa of Medina. So that's kind of an important detail you need to also understand. We use the hadith of praying Asr to not to pray the Asr until you get to Bani Qurayda, and then in Usul al-Fiqh to talk about ijtihad. Sorry, I think I said it was the distance of travel. I think it was a little less than the distance of travel, because I don't think they shortened their prayer. But anyway, the sun set before they missed Asr prayer, some of them, until they got to bed. So it's a distance away is my point. Okay, so now Bani Qurayda could easily watch the city of Medina collapse and they can survive. So there's really no incentive for them to stay, so they renege, and this is, as I said, very treasonous. It's a type of secession from the body politic, which is a great crime morally and legally. And they were armed, is the point. They were armed and openly in a state of war against the Prophet ﷺ and the people of Medina. Right? So that kind of explains, if you use that language, that you can understand what's happening. Not all of them were killed. That's true, but one woman was killed because she killed one of the companions during the siege, Khalad ibn Suwaid. And included amongst those that were killed were Hayy ibn Akhtab, the father of Lady Safiya, who becomes the Prophet's wife, alayhi salatu wasalam. Some of them were spared, and this demonstrates that the ones that were killed were not randomly, but there were some because of they were found to be in collusion with the enemy. So not all of the men were killed. The aftermath of this is that the spoils were distributed. The Prophet ﷺ also married Rayhana, alayhi salam. Sa'd, who was injured, who did this negotiation, he has succumbed to his injuries and died. The Prophet ﷺ said that when he died, the throne of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala shook. Abu Lubaba, we said, stayed up for 6 days, and then finally revelation came to free him. This is the Surah Al-Anfal, verse 27, and Surah At-Tawbah, verse 102. The entire siege of Qurayda lasted 25 days, so a month. So, these are kind of long-winded type of things, and this is what's going to occupy the entirety of the rest of the year 5 of the Hijrah. There was a man, Salam ibn Abi al-Haqiq. This was a man from the Jews of Khaybar, and he was a known enemy to the Prophet ﷺ and a funder of the enemies of Islam, of the state. The Khazraj wanted to take this task to kill him, so the Aus, because the Aus had their day at Banu Qaynuqa because of Sa'd. So a group of 5 of the Khazraj were led by Abdullah ibn Atiq. The Prophet ﷺ said not to attack any women or children, only Salam. They found their way into the city before the gates were closed, and they found Salam and they killed him. In this operation, Abdullah ibn Atiq radiallahu, who led the excursion, he was injured with a broken leg. The Prophet, he came back to the Prophet and he wiped over it and he was healed. So it's one of the miracles of Rasulullah. Now we enter into the 6th year of the Hijrah, on the 10th of Muharram, the day of Ashura, on the 6th of Muharram. This was the battle or excursion led by Muhammad ibn Salama. There were 30 riders. They first this was the first battle after Qurayda. They went out towards Najd, so now they're going out towards the east, where all of kind of the theater of war is kind of the south of Medina in the Mecca and surrounding, and north maybe some Ghatafan and other tribes. Now they're going out to the east. The enemies scattered, and the Muslims got the supplies, and they captured Thumama ibn Athal al-Hanafi, who was trying to kill the Prophet ﷺ on the behalf of Musaylama al-Kadhab, Musaylama the liar. They tie him up in the mosque, and the Prophet ﷺ discourses with him for 3 days. He is released subsequently, and he converts, and then he says this famous line, "No one was more hated by me than you, and now no one is more beloved to me by you." So even though he was sent to assassinate the Prophet ﷺ, there was a way for him to make tawbah and to come to Islam, which highlights the extreme crime of the Bani Qurayda people we just spoke about earlier, why they were killed, those 600 to 700 men, because they were beyond that point. Then in Rabi' al-Awwal of the 6th year of the Hijrah, this is the excursion of Banu Layhan. They had killed Muslims during the battle of Al-Rajiyah, but they are located near Mecca, and the Prophet ﷺ didn't want to attack them. Now after the battle of the ditch, the Prophet ﷺ went after them. In this, the enemy scattered. The Prophet went out on this excursion himself. He stayed there for 2 days, collected the spoils, and returned to Medina. I just happen to have in my notes at this point the battle statistics of all of the battles. So I'm just going to give it to you now, even though we're not done with it. In the 120 months that the Prophet ﷺ lived in Medina, there were a total of 80 battles. 27 the Prophet ﷺ went out in, and 7 he fought in. The total body count of the Muslims was 300, and the total body count of the enemies were 700. All the battles, 300 Muslims died. So, when you talk about today, drone attacks and, killing thousands of people, I mean, that's more than all of the total body count combined in all of the wars of the Prophet ﷺ. So another thing that we need to understand when we talk about Sira, especially the Medina period, which is Ghazawat, all of these battles, people, when they hear the word battle, they think of the modern thing, because our context is the modern context. But this is the pre-modern world, the ancient world. This warfare was very different at the time. And my personal take, it's not like an official fatwa or something. My personal take is that we have to reconsider the legality of modern warfare because of modern weapons. I mean, they create destruction and killing on a level unparalleled in human history, which is certainly against, I mean, I would think, as against the ethos of the maqasid of the Sharia. Anyway, that's just a little thing by me, but I wanted to give you those stats. Okay, the next big chunk in the Sira is the Battle of Bani al-Mustalaq. The Prophet ﷺ heard that the head of al-Mustalaq, his name was al-Harith ibn Abi Dirar, was set on fighting Medina and the Muslims. And this was a Meccan affiliated tribe. So now moving forward, you have to remember who's affiliated with the Meccan, like the Federation, that the Qurayda people kind of started. They're the ones that really started this bad sunnah of creating a coalition against Medina. So the Prophet ﷺ sent Buraidah bin al-Hasib to gather intelligence. After verifying the information, the Prophet ﷺ left with the companions the second day of Sha'ban. Some of the hypocrites also went out with him. And this will begin the downfall of the hypocrites. Al-Harith also had spies along the way to track the movement of the Prophet ﷺ. He was the head of Mustalaq. When Harith heard of the march, those around him got terrified and left. The battle was easily won, and the Muslims lost one due to friendly fire. The battle was so easy that some authors or Sira authors will actually do not consider this to be a battle. But the sources that I relied on, count it as one. In the aftermath, one of those who was captured was Juwayriya, who was the daughter of Al-Harith. She was given to a companion, but the Prophet ﷺ took her and married her due to her stature. As a result of this action, 100 people from the tribe of Mustalaq were freed and came into Islam, since the companion said they were relatives of the Prophet ﷺ. So he married the daughter of the head person. So now all of these people are relatives, so they all get freed. So this marriage caused the freedom of 100 people. For those that are always talking bad about the Prophet ﷺ's multiple marriages. Hypocrites of Medina. Abdullah ibn Ubay ibn Sulul is, the leader of the hypocrites. And he used to encourage people to listen to the Prophet ﷺ before he began the Friday sermon. But at the same time, they colluded with the Jewish tribes of Medina against Medina. However, after 5 years of state building and constant fighting, the hypocrites started to notice that despite the limited resources, the Muslims were winning. Right? This is the key. By this time, by the middle of the Medina period, year 5, year 6, it's very clear that the tide is turning very fast. And Medina is not going anywhere, and the Prophet ﷺ is not going anywhere. So they understood that there was something greater than military resources, allowing them to win, meaning the Prophet ﷺ, the Muslims, so that they wanted to attack this aspect. And this is the beginning of the inside fitna amongst the Muslim community, which we'll pick up in the next clip, inshallah. So the hypocrites were astute, they weren't dumb. They realized that it's not the military strength, because the Muslims didn't have military strength. It was their faith. It was the practice of their faith. It was the cohesion of their society. It was the leadership of the Prophet ﷺ. And this is why, the danger of the hypocrites is even worse than the military threat from Mecca and others. During this time period, end of year 5, beginning of year 6, is the marriage of the Prophet ﷺ to Zainab bint Jahsh radiallahu anhu. She was married to the Prophet's adopted son Zayd ibn Harith. They divorced naturally. The Prophet ﷺ married her after that. And this was a taboo in a Jahili society. But then, the verses are revealed about, there is no adoption and no bloodlines attached through the adoption. This was the Prophet's 5th wife, alayhi salatu wasalam, concurrent wife, and we know this is one of his khasa'is, one of his special traits is he was allowed to marry more than 4 women. But the Prophet ﷺ, or the hypocrites rather, played on both of these issues. The fact that the Prophet ﷺ married Zainab, and the fact that this was now more than 4 wives. So they're like going to create a fitna about these issues. So rumors were spread about this marriage, that the Prophet ﷺ desired her, may Allah a'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajeem, and caused Zayd to divorce, things like that, nasty things like that. So this is sort of how the hypocrites are going to keep moving forward. The Battle of Mustalaq. There was some fighting over water, and Abdullah ibn Ubay used this as an opportunity to bring up, some companions were fighting over some water, And Abdullah bin Ubay bin Salul is there, and he starts encouraging them to fight, reminding them of the tensions that they had in the Jahiliyyah. And Umar radiallahu anhu wanted the Prophet ﷺ to allow him to kill Abdullah bin Ubay, but the Prophet ﷺ refused, saying his major, his famous statement, I do not want in the future that people say that Muhammad killed his companions. Because the hypocrites, outwardly, they portrayed themselves as believers. Inwardly, they disbelieved. So the Prophet ﷺ was concerned about that reputation. And when they came back from the previous, from the battle of Mustalaq, the Prophet ﷺ decided to leave Medina early. When they came back to leave again, and when they came back, Afwan, I misspoke. They came back to Medina earlier than expected because the thing in Mustalaq was there was not a real battle, as some said. Abdullah, the son of Abdullah ibn Ubay ibn Sulul, stood at the gates of Medina and refused to let his father enter because he is a Muslim. And the Prophet ﷺ said, no, let him enter, he's your father. This leads to the story of Al-Ifk. Our mother, Lady Aisha radiallahu anhu, she was with the Prophet ﷺ on this excursion, and she had lost her necklace. When she wanted to stay behind to find it, Sayyida Aisha was at this time very young. So when the companions picked, the hawdaj, the contraption in which she would be in, and it would be placed on a camel, it was very light. But she was young and small and light in her early years, so they didn't notice that she wasn't in as the idea. It kind of felt the same, weight as it always is. So when she woke up, because she wasn't in the contraption, she was so overwhelmed by the fact that she was deserted. She fell asleep. When she woke, she saw a companion came, Safwan ibn al-Mu'attal, and he was also delayed because he had overslept. So he's a straggler, even more of a straggler, and then he's marching towards Medina, and then he finds Sayyidah Aisha. This is before the obligation of a niqab, of the face covering of the wives of the Prophets, alayhinna salam. So he noticed her. Obviously he knows who this person is. So now it's like, wow, this is bad situation. This is a really bad situation. He didn't know what to say. All he said is, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Any way you slice it, it's a bad situation. You leave her, a bad situation. You talk to her, it's a bad situation. You accompany her, it's all bad. They're all bad outcome. What are you supposed to do? And this is why it's a big fitna, and this is what the hypocrites will play on later. So, interestingly, other than saying, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un, he doesn't say anything. He decides to be silent. He kind of like lets his animal go, so she understands she's to ride it. So she rides the animal, and he guided the animal until they reached with the army. Everything was okay, right? No one would have thought of anything bad. But Abdullah bin Ubay bin Sulul was like, oh, this is prime fitna material here. I can exploit this and start spreading these horrible rumors. These rumors started to spread about things that we don't want to say publicly. The Prophet ﷺ was silent throughout this time, and when they got back to Medina, Lady Aisha alayhi salam was so sick. She got very, very sick for a whole month because of the journey. She did not know what was going on. So when she got over her sickness for a whole month, then she started to hear these, devastating rumors. And she was crying days on end. And then finally the revelation came from Surah An-Nur, verse 11 to 21, to give her clearance from her reputation. And the Sahaba that spread the rumors were punished because, some of them unfortunately kind of gave in to that. Okay, we are right before the Treaty of Al-Hudaybiyah. So let's look at some of the battles before Hudaybiyah, some of the minor battles. There was the excursion of Abdullah ibn Auf to Bani Kalb near Dawma al-Jandal. This took place in Sha'ban of the year 6 of the Hijrah. The Prophet ﷺ put a turban on him and advised him. He also said, if they listen to you, marry the daughter of their king. This happened, and this woman is the mother of Abi Salama. There's also the excursion of Imam Ali alayhi salam to one of the tribes of Fadak. This took place in Sha'ban in the year 6 of the Hijrah. Then there's the excursion of Abu Bakr to Wadi al-Qura. This took place in Ramadan of the year 6 of the Hijrah. They had wanted to kill the Prophet ﷺ. A woman and her son were captured. Her name was Qarafa, who hated the Prophet ﷺ and even hired riders to find and kill him. And they served a massive. There was a massive prisoner exchange for the Muslims still in Mecca because of this excursion. And then there was the excursion of Qarz bin Jabir al-Fihri. This took place in Shawwal of the year 6 of the Hijrah. Al-Arniyin had become Muslim. He disobeyed the orders and killed the Prophet's messenger and then left Islam. And the reason I mention that is that it's a common misconception that leaving Islam is a capital offense. It's not a capital offense. What's a capital offense is treason. And because at the time of the revelation, faith and citizenship were really one thing, it is oftentimes assumed by modern Muslims that leaving Islam and the people that are killed for that means that they have that anyone who leaves Islam is killed. That's not the case. I mean, there are many examples, as a matter of fact, in the Sira like this one, of people who have left Islam and they were left. It's people that leave Islam and leave the community's security and come against the modern word that we use for that is treason. Okay, I have a little bit of time left on the clock, but I don't really have time to get into the Treaty of Al-Hudaybiyah, which takes place in Dhul Qa'dah of the year 6 of the Hijrah. So what I'm going to do is just pause very briefly and kind of recap what we're trying to accomplish here, which is the narration of the Sira, the major events of the Sira. I give you some of the fiqh of those events, but not all of them, because that's not the purpose of this course. The purpose of this course and these lectures is to give you, in your mind, an overview of the chronology of the major events. It's impossible, as any Muslim would find it impossible, it's impossible to talk about these things without commenting on them, because we love the Prophet ﷺ and the Sira, and this is our story and we love it, but I can't always do that. So for those of you who are well versed in the Sira, I'm leaving out some details. For those of you who are also well versed, you might notice that oddly I pick something very minute and I pick on it, and a lot of that just has to do with I'm trying to highlight stories and the fiqh of stories that I think are important for you to know. Of course, the whole Sira is important, but I mean, to do the Sira justice, we would need a couple of months of just, very detailed reading of the narrations and the different stories. So I hope that you're finding this approach acceptable. Again, simply I want you to understand the chronology and the major battles, what's happening month by month, year by year. And, we'll continue that in the next 4 lectures until we conclude. Wallahu ta'ala a'la wa a'lam. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Mawlana Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. So alhamdulillah, in today's lecture we were able to finish the narration of the Battle of the Ditch, and it was a big success for the Muslims. It was a small body count battle, but a major battle for the psychology of the Muslims. Unfortunately, the Battle of the Ditch exposed Bani Qurayda as the major, kind of the ones who began the idea of a confederation of Quraysh and surrounding tribes against Medina. So the Prophet ﷺ went to Qurayda to take care of that. It laid siege. The 600 to 700 men were killed. Not all of them were killed. Many of them were spared. But this was a major kind of the beginning of the solidification of Medina and the ridding of the tribes that had reneged on the Treaty of Medina. And then we talked about some of the stories of Qurayda, like Abu Lubaba, who kind of misspoke to the Jews of Qurayda, went and tied himself to the mosque. We talked about Sa'd ibn Mu'adh radiallahu anhu, who finally subsequently was killed. I gave you some stats about all of the battles of the Prophet ﷺ, the body count. I think that's important to know. Then we talked about the Battle of Bani Mustalaq, which is not really listed as a battle by some Sira authors, but it's important because some of them do list it. But on the way back from Bani Mustalaq to Medina, this is where the story of the ifk of Sayyidah Aisha radiallahu anha happens. So we talked about that. I didn't get into so much details because I don't like to speak about nasty things and things that are not true, but it was a major fitna. And it was these type of issues that the hypocrites from now until the end of the seerah, these are the things that the hypocrites try to pick up on. They realize that they're not going to be able to successfully defeat the Muslims militarily, but they want to defeat the morale of the Muslims, and they start spreading rumors. So anything that could potentially be scandalous, on all of its lies, they'll pick it up and they'll start lying and they'll start spreading it. And then I talked to you about some of the minor excursions that took place after the issue of Ifk, before the Treaty of Al-Hudaybiyah. And in that we learned that there was a man who had become Muslim and then left his Islam, and we commented a little bit about apostasy and the rules for that. All of this leads right up to the end of the year 6 of the Hijrah, in which we will talk about the Treaty of Al-Hudaybiyah, which is another major event in the Seerah, but we'll pick that up in tomorrow's class. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina wa Mawlana Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam.